COVID-19 in Africa. And the webinar series is organized by Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium, GET. Please permit me to talk about GET for 1 minute. GET is an organization that was set up at the peak of the Ebola epidemic that ravaged some countries in West Africa in 2015. It was clear during the epidemic that a lot of African countries lacked the infrastructure and the capacity to cope with such health challenge, and there was an urgent need to set up organizations that would build capacity of African countries to cope with health emergencies, especially those related to emerging infectious diseases. And GET, Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium, was one of the organizations that was set up then. The consortium of experts all over Africa. We have experts from 45 countries in Africa that are members of GET. And what we do is work with government and non-governmental organizations to build capacity to cope and tackle emerging infectious diseases like Ebola epidemic and COVID-19 that we are currently facing. So today's webinar will be focusing on vaccine production and vaccine development in Africa. And the title of the webinar today is COVID-19 Vaccine Development Landscape. How involved is Africa? You agree with me that while in most developed countries, death as a result of infectious diseases is reducing, in Africa, we're still battling with a lot of mortality from infectious diseases. A lot of deaths or mortality that could have been avoided by vaccination. We're still coping or battling with it in Africa, especially for children. Research showed that about 45% of children in 2016 died in sub-Saharan Africa alone. These are deaths that could have been avoided. And vaccination is one of the most important medical practices ever introduced, especially against infectious diseases. The painful thing is that in Africa, we are still producing about 1% of the total vaccine requirement on the continent, and about 99% is being imported. This is a serious issue, considering the rate at which Africa is increasing in population. We need to do something urgent, like yesterday, to reverse or to do something with these funny statistics. And today we have two great minds on the platform that will discuss the issue of vaccine production and vaccine development in Africa, especially as it regards to COVID-19. COVID-19 is affecting almost every country on the surface of the earth. As I speak, it has infected over 9 million people and almost 500,000 deaths has been recorded as a result of COVID-19. And scientists and doctors and researchers all over the world are working around the clock to develop vaccines and drugs for the treatment. And we're having clinical trials in different parts of the world. Will Africa join this chariot, or are we just going to sit down and watch other parts of the world develop vaccines and drugs for COVID while we just sit down and expect them to keep exporting it to us? These are issues we are going to be discussing today. And we have two great minds that will be discussing these issues with us. I call them the grandfather of virology and vaccine production on the continent. It's a privilege to have them speak to us on GET webinar. I'm going to introduce both of them briefly, and we are going to start the discussion with them. I start with Professor Oyewale Makinde. Oyewale Tomori, rather. Professor Oyewale Tomori is the president, Nigerian Academy of Science, and was the pioneer vice chancellor of Redeemers University in Nigeria. He's a fellow of the Royal College of Pathologists, UK, Nigerian Academy of Science, and Nigeria College of Veterinary Surgeons, and a recipient of the Nigerian National Order of Merit, Nigeria's highest award for academic, intellectual attainment, and national development. He was a regional virologist, WHO African region from 1994 to 2004. He was involved in the investigation of outbreaks of viral hemorrhagic fevers like Lassa fever, yellow fever, Ebola, and so on. Professor Tomori has served and currently serving on several national and international advisory bodies, and he has authored and co-authored more than 150 publications in peer-reviewed journals. It's a privilege and a great honor to have Professor Tomori on our platform today.
It's my pleasure to be here too.
Another great mind when it comes to vaccine production in Africa, Dr. Alexander Ochem. Dr. Alexander Ochem is an independent consultant, very passionate about promoting indigenous manufacture of diagnostic vaccine and biogeneric pharmaceuticals and other products needed for Africa to become self-sufficient in the production and supply of healthcare products to guarantee adequate supply in the case of any outbreak of disease that threatens global health. Dr. Ochem has consulted for African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, Cape Town, National Biotechnology Development Agency, Abuja, National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, Abuja, and several other organizations within and outside the continent. He has also lectured in several universities on the continent, such as Covenant University, Ottawa, Federal University of Agriculture, FUNAB, University of Jos, Sekoni University of Agriculture in Tanzania, Cape Peninsula University in Cape Town, and is a visiting lecturer to many other universities in different other universities in the world. He has also worked with WHO, UNECA, and several international organizations. Dr. Ochem holds a PhD in molecular genetics and biotechnology, a master's in pharmaceutical chemistry, and a first degree in industrial chemistry from University in Italy. So you agree with me that we have two great minds and the best set of people on the continent to discuss the issues we have today. I'm going to hand over straight to them. My name is Dr. Babadwe, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Global Emerging Pathogens Treatment Consortium. Before I hand over to Dr. Ochem, I want to set some rules for today's webinar. Number one, if you are not speaking, please just mute your mic so that we won't have distractions. And if you have any questions for us, you can type them on the chat something, and we'll read them after their presentation. After their presentation, we'll give opportunity to 1 or 2 persons to speak, and we have a discussion for like 10-15 minutes before rounding up. So I hand over to Dr. Alexander Ochem to open the floor. Doctor, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, but I think I'll start by sharing my screen, isn't that? I should start by sharing my screen. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. I want to thank the organizers of this important webinar and for inviting me to share my thoughts and what I think is going on in Africa. But if I understand very well the program, that we should first talk about vaccines in Africa as a whole. But before I start my presentation, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. But before I start, I want to start not really being rhetoric or making a problem, but that I see about 37 people logged in and keyed in listening. And I want to say that this is one of the many challenges we have in this continent, not being very proactive or participatory in things, because it would be wonderful if we're discussing things like this, that there are many people listening, because everything you listen and any question you ask is important towards what we wish to achieve. Having said this, then I'll say that tonight this evening, I wear two hats, two caps. One as an independent consultant, in healthcare consultant. Then another is as a representative of a continental initiative that thinks about vaccines. Okay, having said that, we'll talk about the landscape of vaccines in the world and in Africa in particular. Do you see my screen? Do you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so after reading through and working with vaccine for over 3 decades, I came up with something that that I termed the Vaccine Doctrine. Okay, and it goes like this: that vaccines are good for children and for economies. So we know that vaccines are good for children, for the health of the children, and for economies. Then another one says that expanding use of vaccines could save up to $44 US dollars for every dollar spent. I put down the, where I got these quotes. And then another one says that for every dollar spent, vaccines offer a return of $44. Okay, then I developed a corollary. People who studied geometry, that when you have a theorem, you prove a theorem, you have a corollary from that theorem. And that my corollary says that self-sufficiency in vaccine availability and supply in Africa necessarily demands sustainable vaccine development and production in Africa. So I ascribe this to myself. So knowing all this about vaccines, about the importance and the use of vaccines, then let's take a look at the global production of vaccines in Africa and the whole world. That we see that Africa, we look at this ball that has the percentages of global vaccine manufacture and sales, and you see that Africa has less than 1% of its own domestic vaccine use. That's the ones being used in Africa. Only less than 1% is being produced in Africa. So it means that more than 99% of vaccines used in Africa are bought from outside. So Africa falls just a negligible fraction of where you put the orders, 15% orders, and South Africa is just a negligible part of that if it has less than 1%. Okay, then what do I say? That Africa as a continent, we hold in this continent more than approximately 17% of global population. And this is a comfortable size of the population, of global population, also in terms of land mass. Yet this continent accounts for barely 5.5% of global vaccine market and use. Okay, and what still contributes less than 0.1%, less than 0.1% of global vaccine manufacture. So this is, I don't know how else to describe it than to say that it's really very poor, outrageous. African countries, again, we absorb more than 60% of externally produced vaccines sourced through the intervention of the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund, the Procure department of that, which is in connection with Gavi. What does this translate to? It means that 1 in every 5 children in Africa does not have access to available vaccines. And this is simply terrible, unsustainable, unbearable. Is too bad. Again, what do we have? Trends of vaccines in demand. We see that there is growing demand, okay, in Africa because of growing demographics. Many more children are born. Okay, yet there were unmet needs. Okay, without national immunization program in many countries are not being implemented, are not strongly implemented, and there are new ones. Okay, so what comes? Okay, we are only dependent on donor support, only things that come from donors, and this is dominated by the UNICEF supply department of the Department of It leads to dependency on external supply of vaccines renders African countries unprepared to address disease outbreak of 2014. And going back a little bit, back in the 2009, the H1N1 influenza. And I don't want to, I purposely left what we are in today, the vulnerability to COVID-19. Everybody is witness to what is happening. When I went to consult for the AVMI, careful, because if at any moment there is health, African countries were definitely going to be left behind. And what is happening now, it's sad for me. It is terribly sad for me when your prediction, negative prediction, comes through. If it were bad, if it was better for me if it was wrong, if I were wrong. But to see that in 2010, 2015, I was stressing that Africa should wake up, because if there is something happening that threatens the global population, Africans will be left behind. And people ignored it. And right now it is happening now, because we see that even from the kits, from the test kits, that we don't have enough, and the world doesn't have enough. So who cares about Africa? Nobody cares about Africa. You can just think that in the United States, the individual states are competing one with another to have them. So what about us? I read one time, I think it was Burundi, I don't want to, pardon me if I make a mistake, but a minister there was asked about the number of cases in his country. And he said 0 cases. And he was asked, why do you say 0 cases? He said, simple, because we have 0 capacity to test. We don't have the test kits. And if we don't test, then we don't have cases. So that is outrageous, what is happening now, how we are, where we are. But all hope is not lost, because inside this continent, for the past 10 years and more, there is an initiative called the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, which has been set up, and it has all the rules, all the things in table, everything ready to really act as a catalyst to support and coordinate efforts to manufacture vaccines in Africa. I want to mention slightly a little bit, if I don't want to digress too much, but people have talked about confidence, because there is also the issue of confidence in vaccines. There's a lot of rumors going on that vaccines are good, but vaccines are not good, and this and that. But one key important thing that would be important for this continent is that the vaccines are made here. Then when it's made here, you can more easily convince the public that this is to protect your health, without any more fearing, or is it good, is it bad, and all that. So what does AVMI do, this African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative? Its aim is to promote the establishment of sustainable and resilient human vaccine manufacturing capacity in Africa, as a catalyst and a coordinator that will promote, support, and coordinate efforts of the African vaccine manufacturers, because we do have vaccine manufacturers actually in this continent. So we don't go, Africa is not completely at a loss. But like I said, it produces less than 1% of its internal vaccines, but it does produce. So we do have capacity in this continent. Okay, then it will also coordinate all the stakeholders, including epidemiologists, public health specialists, clinical trial experts, regulators. I want to stress on these regulators. Later we'll talk about that when we talk about the role of governments, African governments. Work with partners, both public and private. But essentially, I want to end my presentation of the scene. Okay, before I go that, I will say that there are many members of the AVMI within Africa. You see all these members, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt, Nigeria, Congo, Senegal, South Africa, Uganda, Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, Morocco, Tunisia, and Guinea. So I want to end my first presentation by saying that Africa appears a continent that is reluctant to win itself to get over the shackles and legacy of colonization and earlier of slavery. We need to believe in ourselves, believe in our competence, believe in our ability, believe in our capability, and then identify those segments of the value chain, vaccine manufacturing value chain, where we are competent, and we start from there. I want to end for now and pass the baton over to my brother, Professor Yewale. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ochem, for that wonderful introduction. I know you still have so much to talk about as we go on. Professor Tomori, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Can you please give us an overview of vaccine production landscape in Africa?
Well, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier on, I wanted Alex to start because it's more versatile in these issues than I am. But let me focus a bit on certain issues, some factors which I think we need to look at. You can give the same story for virtually as many African countries. But let me start with our country that I know very much. That way back in 1924, or let me start from this. There are different vaccines. There are human vaccines and there are animal vaccines. It would appear that in the animal vaccines, we seem to be doing much better than we're dealing with human vaccines. There are a lot of centers in different parts of Africa that are actually producing animal vaccines, both in Kenya, in Uganda, in the Northern African countries, and in our own country here in VOM. The VOM Center has been producing vaccines since 1924, and they are continuing to produce for the animal population of this country. But it's not the same we can say for the human beings, just like Alex has said. Looking at Nigeria, I think the first time we had the vaccine production unit in Yaba was in 1930. And that was the time we started producing the smallpox vaccine. Incidentally, during my training as a veterinarian, I had to, part of my job was to assist in quality control and assessment of the Yaba vaccine production, because they were growing a lot of these things in animals then. And as veterinary students, we used to go there to go and examine the animals. And so up to, from 1930 until a vaccine, until smallpox itself was eradicated in the world. And then that unit stopped producing yellow fever, smallpox vaccine. But by 1948, that same institute, the Yaba lab they were talking about, started producing anti-rabies for human use. And that again continued for quite some time until the early 80s when a lot of things happened. But I think the most important for me, which excited me, was that by 1952, the Yaba lab added on yellow fever production into their activities and what they were doing. And that went on. And incidentally, when we had the epidemic in Nigeria in 1984-85, the first batches of vaccine that we used were from that lab, Yaba lab. It was when the situation got a little out of hand and we had more cases going on over the place that we had to go outside. But what I'm trying to raise is that vaccines were being produced in this different country, at least in this country and in other countries, which were being used, and we didn't have to go out to go and purchase or hire or beg for vaccine from anybody. And in fact, the rabies, anti-rabies, the smallpox, and the yellow fever vaccine were actually being used in other parts of Nigeria and other West African countries. So we're actually sort of exporting those vaccines. Then what happened to us? In 1990, there was an attempt to upgrade the facility. And that started, if you go to the place now, there's a big building which was set up at that time, which was supposed to increase the production of vaccine, especially yellow fever. We got in touch with quite a lot of people and got in there. But then I'm going to talk a little bit about that. one big problem came in governance. At that 1990, between that 1990 and thereafter, you remember we had a lot of changes of government in this country, from civilian to military to whatever. And virtually everything of that nature was abandoned. And the thing remained the carcass that it was up to about 2016 when another government came up and decided that yes, there was need for us to start producing vaccine in the country. That also failed because as we changed government, that was the end of that. The entire system was but it is not to tell you a sad story. I want to look at VOM, the one that has been producing vaccines for the animal population in this country and exporting to other countries. What did they do? How did they manage to do that? And yet the human side, we failed. I think it boils down to what we call commitment. The individuals who are involved in the situation, the scientists and the manufacturers, those people who are the Nigerians who are there making sure in that places. And they are the ones that have maintained this situation up to today. So I've talked about 2 or 3 things. The issue of commitment to scientists themselves. Now, let me fast forward to now. Alex has already told us so many of the countries that are already producing vaccine and things of that nature. One of the ways that we're going to end up, if we're ever going to succeed, again, it's part of governance, is the fact that Africa must unite. Africa must come together. By that I mean, if one country is producing one vaccine, there's nothing stopping us, all of Africa, is a bigger market, buying vaccine from that same country, as distinct from I want to produce, you want to produce, and everybody is producing, and then we don't have enough market to make those things viable. The greatest obstacle I think we have to this is what we call this external development. While we're setting up, while each African leaders got together to look at vaccine production and say, let's have a regional look to it. Individual countries would then begin to sign agreement with some foreign company and nullify all the plans for collaboration that have happened at the AU. So that political commitment is already there. And I can give a few examples in which we have all agreed that we're going to do something, and one company from Germany comes to another country, they sign an agreement with the individual country, and they start producing vaccine, which is not viable because that country, the population is never enough. The population is so small compared to what vaccine they will need to produce, they'll make viable. Now, another issue which I like to think, it is time for us as Africans to appreciate that there are different stages and different levels in vaccine production. There is the one in which the vaccine itself is developed. There is the one in which the vaccine is manufactured and grown in large scale. There is the issue of testing of the vaccines, the clinical trials. And there is the issue of the marketing of the vaccines. I think it will be important for us as Africans to identify where our strengths lie and not to waste our time in areas where we know we're not yet capable. If we can enter into the vaccine market at a pace where we have the capacity for, that would be a starting point for us to go. Let me again expatiate on that. If, for example, our area is like some of we have vaccines in companies that are making vaccines in different parts of Africa now. If the stage you can come is to join at the stage of vaccine production, which is say cap and filling, then you'll be in a position to at least contribute to that vaccine production. And therefore that becomes a starting point for you to expand your ability later on to other areas which you don't have the capacity. In the issue of clinical trials, there's nothing stopping every African country being involved, setting up the clinical trial centers where they can test all these vaccines at local level. Those are this, and of course the marketing, the regulatory side of it. We must strengthen our different regulatory authorities in African countries to ensure that it is not everything that is brought into our continent that is approved. Currently, what most of our regulatory authorities do is the people come in with the documentation of what they have done, they read it and say, oh yeah, it's approved. Nobody ever goes around to test. I mean, we're seeing the example now with the rapid diagnosis tests that were coming in. It would be a great thing. If I just left a meeting which is suggesting that, look, it is important for us to set our own standards for standardization of these kits. Not only that, which is the same thing you can do for vaccine, but it's also possible if every country cannot validate, then have centers in Africa that can do it for the entire African region. I think it is that collaboration we need also in vaccine production and vaccine activity that will help us move us forward. At least we can start somewhere and then move on from that place, developing other capacity. Let me be blunt. With the current development in many African countries, any of us making noise and saying, I've developed vaccine in one African country or that, maybe a few, I think we should take that with it, not just a grain of salt, a full bag of salt, because the conditions for producing vaccines in different places, many of the research centers in Africa, we don't have it. And that's an area where we are very weak. But then we have other areas where we have strength and can get involved in the vaccine system. Over.
Well, thank you, Professor Tomori, for that huge information in a very short period of time. I'm trying to digest everything you've said. From vaccine production started in 1930. And I was just imagining that I'm sure there will be a lot of countries, European countries and countries in Asia that were not producing vaccines in 1930, and they are now doing very well now. And we still growing. We can't even do what we were doing in the 40s and in the 50s as a country. It's something that we should think about, and it's something that is painful. When others are going forward, we seem to be stagnant or going backward. Yeah, let me go back to Dr. Ochen. And Doc, can you just give us some, or let's discuss on what role should governments in Africa play to enhance vaccine development on the continent?
Thank you again. Do you see my slides? You do?
Yes, you can.
Yes. Okay. Thank you again for that. I just want to make a slight comment to not a comment, a similarity. There is an insect that in my people call it egu, and this insect, when it's young, it clings well, strong to the leaf, green leaf where it's hatched. But when it grows up, as it grows up and matures, it falls off, and it looks like that's what's happening to African countries, like what we were doing before. Instead of moving forward, move backwards. And it's a terrible pity, because others move forward one step and the second step and a third step. But what seems to happen in our case is that we take one step forward and take 3 steps backwards, which is very unfortunate. Now let's talk about the role of African countries. Before I talk about the roles, I just looked at these are things that have been going on for several years. I actually say decades. And that's what has brought me to thinking that if we as Africans want to go forward, we really need to move from words to action. When I wrote an article for the Nigerian Medical Practitioner, this is a journal of the University of Lagos, I went back and I saw many declarations of African governments. There is the Abuja Declaration, and then years before there was the Addis Ababa Declaration, and so on and so on and so on. So make these declarations, and after the meeting and after these declarations, they just get filed away and nothing happens. Now, this is a declaration, an Addis Ababa Declaration of 2016, where we say that, and it's just not one ministry. We, the African ministers of health, finance, education, social affairs, local governments, attending this ministerial conference on immunization in Africa, which took place on the 24th to 25th February 2016 in Addis Ababa, and convened by the World Health Organization in collaboration with the African Union Commission, are committed to continued investment in immunization programs and a healthy future for all people of the African continent. This is a commitment made by several ministers, health, finance, education, social affairs, and local governments. I go back a little bit and then I say 2014, the pledge in Abuja again, that African leaders have pledged to prioritize sustainable immunization programs as part of continued investment in the healthy futures of children and families of their countries. The Immunize Africa 2020, we are now in 2020. The declaration launched in Abuja today during an event which was hosted by the African Development Bank, recognizes the $700 million that African countries are projected to spend on co-financing vaccines. And this is a very important point. This is co-financing. So African governments and African countries are spending lots of money, because $700 million in 4 years is a hell lot of money. And this money goes where? Instead of looking inwards in our capabilities and trying to strengthen our capabilities, we tend to depend externally. And this is one of the fundamental problems, that only when externals, foreigners, tell us what we are and what we have or what we can do, that's what we believe. And it is just terrible. Okay. In the conferences that were just the AU's, the African Union Commission just had a two days meeting in which my good friend Simon Agwale participated and represented AVMI. Simon Agwale is the CEO of a vaccine making manufacturing company in Nigeria, Innovative Biotechs. He's based in Nigeria and in the United States. He participated. So one thing I took, one take-home message for me was that African governments, African people participating, agreed to speak with one voice. To speak with one voice. And if it means to speak with one voice, it means that you have to act. So what do we see there? We at AVMI believe that there is limited space for multiple players in the vaccine production. And my brother just mentioned it, having too many people. Because if we have too many, but we can have a number of regional hubs that could be established. This requires the right level of political and technical support, a clear, well-funded and coherent regional policy making and planning approach, the development of the necessary ecosystem to establish viable, competitive, and sustainable, resilient vaccine manufacturing capacity, the infrastructure, because a country that cannot boast of having continuous supply of electricity might well forget anything about making vaccines, because you cannot. It's simply not possible unless you find ways to circumvent it. But even if you circumvent it, but it's not, it might jack the prices, the production price too high. So in the end, you find out that making things in Africa becomes more expensive. So what else can the governments do? If we accept to talk with one voice, then we must have to act as a united body. I said that there are a number of vaccine manufacturers in Africa continent at the moment, and these are there is the IPD, Institute of Pasteur in Dakar, there is the one in Tunis, there is Vaxira in Egypt, there is Ethiopia, and there is BioVac in South Africa. Let me underline here that Senegal, the Institute Pasteur in Senegal, makes globally accepted WHO pre-qualified vaccines, although I don't too much depend on this pre-qualification, which I will explain later on when I go further. But then these others are all working. And if we have that, we still have others in Nigeria, okay? And there is we call them prospective manufacturers, okay? That is in Nigeria, a co-venture, a venture between the M&B, Mayambeka, and the government of Nigeria that established the biovaccines in Yaba, Lagos. And that is, I just mentioned earlier, I didn't put it in this slide, the innovative biotech headed by Dr. Simon Agwale. And then again, there is another one in Ghana coming up. So what do we have to do? What does the government have to do? My brother there just mentioned that if we have too many players in the field of vaccine manufacturing, then we get dissipated. There will be dissipation of efforts and competition amongst ourselves. No, that will not be so. Without bias to any country or any company, but if we act as one voice, we speak with one voice and act as one united body, then we have to do a division of labor and know who is capable of doing what, where. And that person or company or country takes it on themselves. Yesterday, 2 days ago, during the AU conference, I put in a question which was not answered. I said, because I understand that IPD, Institute Pasteur Dakar, is expanding. I know that they're expanding. All right. But I said, why don't you focus only on making your yellow fever vaccine, which is WHO pre-qualified, and make sure that you supply the whole continent of Africa. Let every other country purchase yellow fever vaccine from Dakar. And then another one, whoever, be it Biovac, be it Vaccira in Egypt, be it Biovaccines in Nigeria, that makes another vaccine, takes charge of that and provides for the whole continent, so that becomes the port of call for every African country to buy from them. Then what else can what else can governments do? We've been talking about vaccines made here, made there in this country. That is the important thing, to regularize, to harmonize the regulatory processes in the countries. And we are, like my brother said earlier, country that cannot do, then there will be a hub, a continental hub that can do that. The AVRF is made to harmonize regulatory processes in Africa, such that, and this is why I said I will mention the WHO pre-qualification, because if we have strong harmonization, that a vaccine made in Egypt can be used in South Africa without problems, then we don't need WHO pre-qualification, because WHO pre-qualification is nothing but that a country A wants to buy a vaccine from country B. The country A is not happy with the regulatory processes in country B, then they ask for WHO pre-qualification. Then the WHO sits in and says yes, and qualifies and says yes, they are GMP and whatever you like, and so that their vaccines can be used. But if we have harmonized regulatory processes across the continent, then a vaccine made in Nigeria can be used in South Africa without any problems, and vice versa. So what is this? Okay, the AVRF have been made to increase the efficiency and quality of reviews and inspections, and the timelines and transparency for regulatory decisions for all international trials conducted in Africa, accelerated the AMRH, this is again, African Medicine Regulatory Harmonization, and then linking all regional economic groups, enhance emergency preparedness on the continent, in the regs and in individual countries. This is key, because if we have that vaccines made, yellow fever vaccines made in Dakar can be used anywhere in Africa, then we don't have a problem. Okay, sorry. Okay, so that is where I want to stop for the involvement of.
Thank you, Dr. Chem. I know if I give you the floor, you can speak to tomorrow morning. Or...
Yes, yes, I could speak to tomorrow. I just have to limit stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful contribution. Let me quickly go back to Professor Tomori. I was speaking with someone this week, Dr. Dayo Abayomi. I'm sure Professor Tomori will know her. And I told her that I will be bringing to Professor Tomori for a webinar this Friday, and she was like, wow. Professor Tomori was almost a professor when she left medical school in 1976. So that shows you the kind of experience Prof have gathered over the decade. And you agree with me, Prof, that to get involved in vaccine production, you need a level of expertise. The question is, you've been around for so long. Do you think we have the level of expertise on the continent that can handle or that can work in organizations or laboratories that are producing vaccine on the continent? Do we have expertise on the continent for vaccine production?
Thank you, Dr. From what we've been saying today, the answer is a big, big yes. But the situation, let me divert a little. Alex said something about he doesn't have too much about WHO pre-qualification. At the bio-vaccine, we decided that pre-qualification is something, but our mantra would be that we will not produce anything that will harm anybody. If you have that as your foundation, WHO pre-qualification is icing on the cake, because the foundation is there. You made it up from the gardener in front of your company to the top management. We are all working together to produce something that will not harm anybody. With that foundation, I think the issue of trusting vaccines in this place, but then that comes down to the individual. Now you ask the question, do we have the capacity? I mean, the people and all that. Let me put it this way. You can have the best carpenter in the world. If you don't give him the tools to work, he's as useless as a non-carpenter. And that's the problem that we have with many of our countries. It is not the people, it is the enabling environment to make them function. Why are trained people going outside the country? Because the environment for them to function, when you talk about the brain drain, the enabling environment for that brain to be nurtured is not there. So they drain to a place where they can get their nurture. And that's the problem that we're having. All of our colleagues who are in the diaspora today, they left here. Why? Because the situation, the environment was not good for them to function. And if they come back now, the situation has gone worse in many other countries. If they come back now, no matter what they're producing in the US, if they come back, I give them 1 day, give them 1 week to discover that they won't be able to produce anything, which brings us back to the fact that you need that enabling environment, which is missing in many of our places. There are talented people, there are wonderful, well-educated Africans in different places. And all you need to prove, just let them step outside the shores of Africa and they become the world expert that you've seen around the whole place there. So what we have not done in many of our African countries is that we have not created the environment for people to function and to excel. And so not only that, and there are many examples in different parts of the world, when you don't put your resources, you don't put your focus on developing your people, that's what you are paying for now. People are what make the difference. When we talked about government, who is the government? It's the individual that is there. Is that person, your president, your minister of health? If they don't perform well, then you have a bad government. If you have people in the government who are stealing your money, then you have poor governance. There's no accountability. Those are the situations with us. We grew up, I think I was telling a group of people the other day, you mentioned me being a professor before I was even born. But the point is that the issue is that at the time we had all those situations, we were able to do research in this country with the resources. We produced the reagents we had because there was not funding to do whatever we had to do. But over the years, things changed. Alex was mentioning, Africa has to put 15% of its budget. These are all political statements, which their leaders are not committed to. And that's why, they go to all these meetings. The minister that signed that agreement, by the time the plane takes him back home, he has been removed. The one who comes in does not know what he signed. And therefore, there's this problem, that gap within leadership, the governance, the leadership, and that makes all the major difference. And you can see many of the other countries, that got independence at the same time as African countries, you probably find that the difference is not the people, the difference is the leadership. I don't want to keep mentioning examples, but we have many of them in Africa who ruled us in the 1960s to now and brought us to where we are. So back to your question, yes, we have enough people, enough talented people, even among the decadents that surround us, to do what, because it's human being. And the bio-vaccine, which we are hoping that in another 2-3 years, we start making some production in this country. The steps, the delays have not been caused by any other person, but by human beings who are in government. And when things that need to be done are not done, then you can't go to the next step. So we have refused to create the enabling environment. In fact, I used the word that, I'll tell you a very interesting story to show up about people being talented. In 1980, I can't remember, 85, 80 something, we had a big epidemic of Lassa fever in this country. A few of our colleagues from outside the country came to work with us. There were 2 students who came in from the US and who worked with me, and I took them from Ibadan. This is how we collect samples. This is how we do it. And to them, they were students, so they came in to learn. Last year, 2019, it was 50 years beg Gavi to extend. What Gavi said was that because of our situation of the economy, Nigeria has moved from being dependent on to one that is, is capable of free of Gavi support. What did we do? We went back and begged Gavi and said, please give us 10 more years. We are not ready. So a man you're saying should be graduating is now just taking JAMB exam. These are the issues. That's the situation with us. It is not because there are not people in this country. It is because the environment does not allow you to function effectively. Over.
Thank you, Professor Tomori, for those frank statements. A man that should be graduating has gone back to taking JAMB exam. Those of you outside Nigeria may not understand what JAMB exam is, but it's the entrance exam to university in this country. So that is a very serious issue. Yeah, we are almost behind schedule, and I can see a lot of questions on the chat. Finally, Dr. Ochem, from all our discussion, I can deduce that there are three very important aspects to vaccine production on the continent: the technical and expertise aspects, the governance and policy, and business aspects. And we've discussed a lot of difficulties around, especially governance aspects. But moving forward, what exactly do you think Africa should do to enhance vaccine production on this continent?
Okay, I don't have further slides to share on this, but I will just say that what we need to do, like I mentioned earlier, there is a body that has been set up, okay, nearly 10 years ago, the Africa Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. AVMI has also set up a task force to coordinate, to look into the testing of clinical trials and everything about COVID. So we have already a base. Yeah, what I would strongly suggest for African countries to do, if they will listen this time, is to rally around this initiative and say, hey, what do you need? Now you are, because all vaccine manufacturers in Africa belong to AVMI, as well as those initiatives, those beginning ones, the prospective manufacturers all belong there. The AVMI has also structures and relationship with institutions that can build capacity. So So instead of going back now, they have IVMI has a database of all these institutions. So the African countries don't have to go now to the grassroots to start to look for who does what. There is this institution here in Cape Town, where they can be, we call it a one-stop shop, where you get all the information you need. And they will also advise on what things need to be done. But like I said earlier, there is the enabling environment that we need to create. If we don't create them, like my brother there said, we are going back, somebody who was supposed to graduate and goes back to take the entrance examination. So we keep running around in circles. Okay, there's no need running around in circles. Go to AVMI. There is this shop there. They have they have the competency. They have everything. So you look in them, work with them, and support them, and then they pull up, because the work that they have done for the past 10 years need to be valorized.
Yes, go on. Yes, I can.
Okay, so that is it.
Okay.
So the countries need to put their hands together, get their countries ready, and those that are not ready, don't have the infrastructure, support those that have the infrastructure, so that we're speaking with one voice, acting as a united body, and that's the way forward. If African countries get together and again come away from excessive dependency, because I also know that necessity is the mother of invention. As long as we are comfortable to get vaccines from Gavi, I tell you, nobody will make effort to develop vaccines, to manufacture vaccines. But if we put it on ourselves, no, we don't want this anymore, then we look around and say, what we do? We know the things to do, and the things to be done are here with us. There is the place that I shared again, this initiative. Go there, you get all the information, and that's it, and we can move forward. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Doc. Yeah, we can't close this meeting without talking about COVID. In 2 minutes, Professor Tomori, do you think Africa is contributing enough when it comes to COVID-19 research and clinical trials?
Well, I'm laughing because that's a wish, but that's not the reality. We wish we could be doing what we should. I think, for me, I think we are a continent that has not been that proactive. And I will tell you why I'm saying that. We know our capability, we know the resources we have. Like my people say, if you don't have a mother, if you have anybody around your house, you try to avoid getting a sore at the back of your body because your hand can't reach that sore. We knew whether whatever COVID was coming in different parts. We waited until it got into our country, many of our countries, before we took action. We were like we're standing before a lion that was yawning, and we said we wanted to see when this lion will finish yawning, what will he do? Now the lion has finished yawning in the name of COVID, and he has caught all of us. Let me give you a good example. When that first case came into Nigeria, that day we should have locked our gates. Because now it's only 200 travelers who came into the country that has given us the 222,000 cases we're having now. Imagine if just only one would have had at that time, we could have taken care of that. So know your capability and prepare for that. Now this is going to overwhelm us. And many other countries, today I listen on a daily basis at the WHO African region, listening to comments. I mean, as the numbers are escalating in different parts of Africa. There are about 10 countries that are actually driving the COVID problem in Africa, and Nigeria, Syria, South Africa, each one of them. But having said that, this will be an opportunity for us to look back and see where did we fail. We are a continent that lives perpetually on lessons forgotten. We had Ebola, we had Lassa fever, we had yellow fever, and yet this one caught us unaware. So we're just running helter-skelter after it. And we're doing what others are doing without thinking deeply. So on that ground, I don't think we're doing what we should be doing. We should look at our own situation as it is and take action appropriately. Over.
Yeah, Dr. Chem, we'd like to say one or two things on Africans' preparation or contribution to COVID-19 research and clinical trials.
I can just echo the words of my brother, Professor Yewole, that we are far from where we should be. And when COVID broke out, okay, there were lots of talk about Blacks, Africans being resistant to COVID. I said, this is nonsense because there's no genetic ground to say that Africans genetically are immune to that. The only thing was that we hoped that the heat in Africa would be a slight, not delay, not deterrent, but a little bit of a delay. And that was a little bit what happened. But like Prof said, you always said, we failed to take the necessary measures that we should have taken then. We failed to, we don't learn from our own mistakes, and that's why we keep on running around in circles. And as we talk now, we are still not yet doing anything that we're supposed to do, notwithstanding the capacity that I just said that there is domiciled here. Okay, and that goes on saying we don't believe in ourselves. If we don't believe in ourselves, and then Afrivac means Africa, meningitis in Africa. Yet the vaccine had to be developed elsewhere, manufactured elsewhere, and just brought into Africa. My director then, I was at WHO, I said, oh, Africa needs more. Africa needs more. But what does Africa need more? This takes me back to maybe 20 years ago at the beginning of the millennium, when Africans were saying that we want to be involved in the biotechnology revolution. And I say, who is going to involve you? You have to involve yourself by getting into your house and doing the things that you're supposed to do, because nobody is going to involve you. That is how we are still here today in Africa. I'm sorry to say that, to digress a little bit, where other countries, other continents have abandoned biotechnology, have gotten all the benefits of biotechnology. African countries are still asking themselves whether they will do biotechnology or not. So excepting for South Africa, oh man, I just don't know what to say. How many countries maintain the 1% GDP investment, 1% GDP in health? None. So we are far away. We are just dreamers, and we continue to dream, regardless of the competency that we do have domicile in this continent. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Uchem, for that wonderful contribution. We have so many questions on the group chat, and I'm not sure we can take most of it. We're a bit behind schedule. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give opportunity to one or two persons to raise their hands and contribute. And for the questions on the chat group, we are going to harvest everything and share with the panelists for them to reply, and I will share it with the participants via email. The presentation also made by Dr. Ochem will also be shared with the participants via email. So in 5 minutes, if you have anything to say, if any participant has anything to say, you can just raise your hand and I'll give you opportunity to speak for 1 or 2 minutes before we round up the program. Okay. Well, I think Okay. Professor Charles. Professor Charles, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dotun. Thank you, Dr. Ochem and Prof. Tomori. A very great presentation. And I just put on the chat there what Professor Tomori prophesied about 5 years ago about how we are going to forget the lessons from the Ebola epidemic for our next outbreak. And we just did that. Just, we don't listen to our prophets. Over.
Thank you, Prophet Tomori. I hope the next prophecy will be positive.
Oh boy.
Can we have another contribution before we round up, please? Okay. If there's, I think, there's a way, if you're having interesting discussions, 1 hour can fly like 10 minutes. And we've learned, personally, I've learned so much today. I've learned Dr. Ochem started with scary statistics about vaccine production in Africa. Africa contributing less than 0.1% of global vaccine production, and in about 1% of the vaccine produced on the continent or used on the continent is produced in Africa. African children not having access to vaccine production. And the various challenges we are having with vaccine production on the continent, from governance to need for Africa to unite, regulatory authorities, strengthen capacity, need to speak as one voice, and the need to strengthen AVMI as an organization coordinating vaccine production on the continent. This that is a summary of what, or a bit of what I've gained, and I'm sure a lot of people on the platform too have gained so much from the conversation this evening. Let me end up by thanking Professor.
I see there's Patrick Tipu that raised his hand.
Okay, Professor Patrick.
Patrick Tipu.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
You can unmute yourself and speak, please. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. And this is a very, very interesting forum. And thank you to GET for organizing it and allowing Alex and Professor Tomori to bring forth some salient points about what we've not done and what we should do. But I just want to highlight something that we are doing currently. And this is speaking with a hat of AVMI on. And that is Simon Agwali heads up a working group within AVMI focused on the response from manufacturers to the COVID-19 challenge and the opportunity. And we would like to connect with other interested stakeholders who can make a contribution, help us shape that space. But basically, the task of this working group is to focus on how can we shift the needle, as the saying goes, so that we're not always talking about what we should have done. And the message is that we don't have to start from scratch. We've got a mix of manufacturers on the continent that provide us an opportunity to coordinate amongst ourselves, to come up with some key focus areas which we as manufacturers need to focus on to move things forward. And I think that the challenge is to those entities already in the manufacturing game to highlight specifically where the support needs are, generate the plans to enable Africa to establish large-scale manufacturing capacity, not only for COVID-19, but for future pandemics as well as for routine vaccine production. So COVID-19 from an AVMI perspective just brings home the point, but it is not the point itself. The point itself is far bigger, and it is a future that stretches across decades, but we need to move now. And so I thank Alex and I thank Professor Tamori for highlighting these very, very important issues. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that good contribution, Patrick. I can testify to the great work AVMI is doing on the continent. AVMI and GET collaborated in, was it 2 years ago?
Yes.
Organized a conference in Sierra Leone, and it was a great collaboration. And I sincerely hope we can start up something good again, especially when, as regards to COVID-19 on the continent. Maybe we'll discuss about that after this webinar. But I think we have to round up now, and let me thank our panelists, Professor Tomori and Dr. Chem, for those wonderful presentations from years and years of experience working on vaccine production and virology on the continent. A lot of us, I believe everybody on the platform have learned so much from the experience you share this evening. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for creating time to share your experience with the continent, with participants and stakeholders on the continent. I sincerely appreciate that on behalf of GET Executive. And to our panelists that have stayed with us for almost 1 hour, 30 minutes, listening to different conversations and discussions. I'm sure if we allow Professor Tomori and Dr. Chen to continue, we will not leave this webinar today. But at least the little they've shared, we are going to digest it. Hopefully, I hope participants will go back to their various organizations and institutions and use what they've heard today to contribute positively to vaccine production on the continent. And I want to say that the essence of GET organizing these webinars is not just to gather people to speak, but we are recording this webinar, a webinar series, and it will be on YouTube immediately after this webinar. And what we're planning to do is actually to digest this webinar series and bring out salient important points that can be used to influence policy, develop policy briefs that hopefully will be useful for policymakers on the continent. So thank you, Professor Tomori and Dr. Chem. And to our participants, thank you for staying with us for almost 1 hour, 30 minutes listening to everybody, or to Professor Tomori and Professor Chem. Until we meet on the same platform next week, please spread the news, spread the message, and not the virus. Keep safe. Spread